Read the title of this video and weep, dear viewer, for Return of the Obra Dinn cannot be explained. Impossible though it is to define the exact details of Obra Dinn's plot before you move on to the next video in disgust, for who likes being lied to, let me amend that opening sentence. Return of the Obra Dinn cannot be explained in full, but this video will get as close as humanly possible to an explanation and go further still into the realms of speculation and theory, and it will be really good video. You'll get a chocolate chip muffin at the end as well, just for reaching the end of the video. So, the good ship the Obra Dinn was lost at sea in 1803 before it returned to port 4 years later. None of the 60 souls that were on board are still here. In order to find out why, the player must revisit memories placed at the exact moment of their demise. Despite taking place in the middle of the ocean, none of these 60 characters have much depth. Despite predominantly taking place in the past, there is little backstory to be found. Character wants or needs seldom expressed. And for a traditional narrative, this is a death sentence. Lord of the Rings, Star Wars, Titanic, Toy Story, Interstellar, The Godfather. What comes to mind when we think of these films? It's character. Characters whose motives, goals, aspirations, and flaws cause them to change over the course of a story. They are what drives the plot, and they are what we remember. The people. Return of the Obra Dinn has 60 characters. Add in the player character, and they're terribly British made, and that's 62. I could tell you the job of every single one. I could tell you what they were doing the moment of their death and who killed them, but of their motives, relationships, their history, we simply do not have the answers. So why is Return of the Obra Dinn one of the most memorable stories I've played? Before we find out, a couple of proposals, a couple of quid pro quos. Number one, I published a video on the Obra Dinn story 2 days ago, and I'm very fond of it. So it would mean the world to me if you watched it. It would give you some context, wider context to this video, because it is a retelling of the Obra Dinn story as if played by the player for the first time. So it is an extension of the story you play as the player. It's the first one I've done of a kind that I want to do going forward. Just basically, well, just go watch it, find out. I'm not going to tell you. Number two, this video will give a quick overview of the Obra Dinn story. Still, so it's not like just we're completely throwing you in there, but the main aim is more to piece it together and find out what it means, what it's all about, and the decisions that Lucas Pope, the creator, made in order to tell the story and the narrative. Obra Dinn story in this case, and then explainer, Obra Dinn explained. This is the format going forward, and I have also just published a poll on my community tab, which is a poll for the game I'm going to play next. So there are games on there like God of War, Disco Elysium, The Quarry, a couple of others. So if you want to have some say in what video I play next, please go over there and vote, because obviously the one with the most votes will be the game I play next, because I like to give back to you, the people. I'm just reusing the same content. That's very lazy. I won't be doing this preamble type thing for videos going forward, but just this one as it's kind of one of the first ones of its kind, series-wise. I thought I'd let you know. And if you care at all, please leave a like on the video, or the video before I did, or subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. There's plenty of options available to you. The most appealing is probably if I just shut up and get on with the video. So let's start there. This is explaining the story of Return of the Obra Dinn. The Chief Inspector of the Honourable East India Company is sent a letter requesting their presence aboard the Obra Dinn, a ship that departed London for the Orient in 1803 and has returned 4 years later, completely unmanned. 2 other items of great import are sent the inspector's way, a catalogue and a pocket watch. The book contains deck plans, a crew and passenger roster, and the complete story of events that happened on board. Currently, that story is blank. The pocket watch allows the inspector to trip back in time, the means to fill in the pages of the book. As such, Return of the Obra Dinn story is told piecemeal and in non-linear fashion, a big part of its appeal as a murder mystery. We start at the end, eased into the game's mechanics and handed a fair share of intrigue. Why did things end this way? We are then thrown into the belly of the action, drowned in questions and spectacle. Much of the story then unfolds differently depending on how you explore the ship. To get the clearest understanding of the plot, however, we should view it in chronological order, following the Obra Dinn's charted course. We start, therefore, in Falmouth, just 300 nautical miles from London, the point of origin. The Obra Dinn's voyage has just begun, but already death has snuck on board. While loading cargo on deck, the ropes carrying one pallet snap and boxes and barrels bury an unsuspecting Samuel Peters, killing him. Nathan Peters, Samuel's brother, blames Lars Lind, who was overseeing things, but the rope snapped due to excess weight. A stowaway was hiding in one of the barrels. He too dies in the accident. 800 nautical miles later, the Obra Dinn is off the coast of Portugal and two of the crew, Solomon Said and Renfred Rajub, have come down with a fatal illness.
We'd spread? If so, we'd all have it. They must have picked it up at the Alaska House.
The East India Company employed Indo-Asian sailors known as Lascars to sail aboard European ships, and in theory, Lascars were provided money and shelter of sorts in England while they waited for their return voyage to Asia, but in practice, they were often just abandoned once they got to London and left to fend for themselves. The Merchant Shipping Act of 1823, which is one of my favourite shipping acts, made the East India Company legally viable for Lascars, but that is 20 years away from current events on the Obra Dinn. The Lascar House was most likely a sort of underground, unofficial housing for Lascars. Conditions were probably poor, and for Solomon and Renfred, essentially a death sentence. With that history lesson out of the way, let's get back to the ship. All things considered, the Obra Dinn's voyage has thus far gone by without much fuss. Not to dismiss the 4 deaths that had already happened, but it was the 1800s. The infant mortality rate was 33%. These people were more okay with death than they were personal hygiene. I mean, it was another 70 years until doctors were washing their hands before a surgery. And this surgeon had a magical pocket watch, so who knows where his hands have been? Deep in some dark and magical juju, most likely. While on the topic of foreign passengers, worthy of note are 4 Formosan royalty that are on board the ship that are displayed in the little picture. For reference, Formosa is what is now known as Taiwan. The Formosans brought on board a chest that looks shiny and expensive enough to essentially kick the plot into motion, which is very kind of them. In Chapter 3, Edward Nichols, one of the story's key characters, sneaks into the cargo hold. He knocks out Hock Seng Lao, who was guarding the chest, and takes a peek. He finds something even shinier within the chest, but is stopped when Nunzio Pasqua comes down the hold.
Senor Nichols, is that you?
His cover blown, he stabs Pasqua. The next scene snaps to the death of Hock Seng Lao, who has confessed to murdering Pasqua. So, how did Nichols get away with murder? Why did Hock Seng take the fall? The prevailing theory is that Nichols framed Lao by getting Li Hong, a Chinese topman, to purposefully mistranslate Hock Seng's account of the murder. In Chapter 4, we see Li Hong understanding the Formosan language. It Bengxia warns Bun Lan Lim that if the monsters come, you must stay down. Li Hong remarks, "They say strange things about monsters." So it seems that Nichols had a skeleton crew of co-conspirators, who then escape the Obra Dinn in the last part of Chapter 3. They capture Bun Lan Lim and It Bengxia, load the chest into a lifeboat, and set course for the Canaries, the nearest body of land. Why they take the Formosans with them is not entirely clear. Perhaps they intend to interrogate them about the chest, what it does, how much it's worth, how to sell it. There are many reasons as to why Nichols did any of this, but rather than debate them all, there's one clue that I'm settling on as good reason. The Obra Dinn's voyage was from London to the Orient. Now, from what I can tell from a little bit of research, 19th century Orient included present-day Turkey, Greece, the Middle East, and North Africa. Isn't really where the ship is heading if we look at its charted course. Wikipedia says that the Obra Dinn was sailing around the Cape of Good Hope which is the Cape Peninsula of South Africa, which looks a lot more in line with the charted course, although the wiki source is this Eurogamer article, and no such quote can be found that actually supports this. But that is Wikipedia for you. Maybe this was just the first leg of a long journey, because, I mean, Taiwan is not close to South Africa, especially on a boat. The important bit, I think, is the secondary definition of the word Orient, which is to mean the special luster, the special lustre, the special lust of a pearl of the finest quality, with reference to fine pearls from the East. So, we have our pearl with its very powerful allure. We have our heading. We have the calling. No one survives the calling. Itbengsia was right. The monsters do come, and they slay all aboard the lifeboats except for Nichols, who is hiding beneath the benches the entire time. Most are killed by the mermaids before Itbengsia plunges his hand into the chest. Doing so kills Sia, but stuns the beasts. Nichols drags them on board and, unable to continue onwards, turns the boat around and rows back to the Obra Dinn. When he returns, Chio Tan, now the last living Formosan, shoots Nichols on sight. Robert Witterell, Captain Robert Witterell, is met with 3 corpses and some stunned and slimy beasties. He orders the crew to hoist out the mermaids and locks them away in the lazarette. Even while stunned, the beasts take a couple of crew members down on the way. But it is while in the lazarette that the mermaids indirectly murder a good 75% of the Obra Dinn's remaining crew. 9 perish in Chapter 6 when grotesque crab riders raid the decks. During the doom, the Kraken kills 8 and is responsible for the disappearance of 7 others, tossed overboard or torn apart off screen. It is quite apparent that the Obra Dinn is at the Kraken's mercy. In Chapter 8, Bargain, we realise why it didn't sink the ship completely. It takes place in the lazarette while the Kraken rages on the main deck. The captain is in a rage of his own. He shoots one mermaid, stabs another, and threatens the third, ordering it to call off their Kraken. It does so, leading us to believe that the mermaids summoned these sea monsters to attack. Once the Kraken retreats and the storm subsides, Witterell orders Paul Moss and others to escape on the last remaining lifeboat. Paul is killed in the process, but Surgeon Henry Evans, 2 passengers, and 4th mate steward Davy James manage to escape to Morocco. A key part in the story, as Henry Evans is the one who sends the inspector the catalogue and the pocket watch and asks them to uncover the truth. Why couldn't the entire remaining crew return to London? You know, why couldn't everyone just get along? Well, Chapter 9, Part 1 reveals that a mutiny is being concocted. The reasoning for the mutiny is pretty straightforward. I mean, the boat's been attacked by evil mermaids, devil crabs, and a no-good darn Kraken. The Obra Dinn may well be cursed, or at least has a touch of dark magic about it, and naturally, fingers are pointed at the captain, especially as no one on board is in the best state of mind, you know, due to the evil mermaids and the devil crabs and the frickin' Kraken. Far less clear is information on how such a mutiny is planned. Alfred Klestel broaches the prospect to 4th mate John Davies and gunner Olus Wiata, but dies before a decision is made. Midshipman Thomas Lanky overhears and sounds the alarm. Mutiny! Mutiny! And in quick succession, Olus kills Lanky, Davies kills Olus, and Henry Brennan kills Davies. So no one in the room when the mutiny is first mentioned is still alive 2 minutes later. Instead, it is 1st mate William Hoscott, Henry Brennan, and topman Lewis Walker that plan to overthrow the captain, and we have no clear answer as to how or why. Again, the simple answer is that everyone is just freaking out. Hello, Kraken! But this omission of detail does dilute the final chapter a little bit, in my opinion. The end is the captain's dramatic last stand. He shoots his 1st mate, slits Brennan's throat, does this awesome 180 upper body roundhouse to club Walker in the face, and then he shoots himself. The captain is a beast and goes out on his own terms, but there lacks that tiny bit of extra juice from the character development side of things to really drive it home. Take this line, for example.
Abigail, your brother, my friend, I shot him dead.
This has potential to add real gravitas to the final chapter. But we have no reason to believe that Hoscut and Witterel were good friends. There are no scenes or dialogue between the two of them, no hidden motive for why Hoscut would be willing to mutineer his captain, so we have to simply take it at face value. Chapter 8 shows Witterel save the lives of those up on the main deck by striking a deal with the mermaids. Chapter 9 shows him help a lucky few escape to Morocco. The captain shows sacrifice, leadership, resilience, the hallmarks of a lead character. But there is no exploration or extension of those traits, which prevents the ending being anything more than just a really cool scene. It's not just the captain that misses out either. In chapter 8 we realise that Henry Evans orchestrated this whole thing. He is the reason for our being here, but too many questions surround the character for it to be any deeper than that. Why did he choose us? Where did the pocket watch come from? How many times did he wash his hands, like really wash them? The bargain chapter shows its cards too early, I think. It told us there was going to be a big twist, the final piece that would trigger the Eureka realization. Return of the Obra Dinn is so good at curating those moments naturally through its gameplay, figuring out Henry Evans' identity, figuring out crew members by the numbers on their hammocks, paying very close attention to accents. They were the real Eureka moments, and they were curated by the gameplay, not the story. We did it. And guess what? That is great. Yeah, I'm pleased about it. And let me explain why. Return of the Obra Dinn's story is actually driven by MacGuffins. Not muffins. You have not reached the end of this video quite yet. A MacGuffin is a plot device, usually in the form of an object that is of large import to the character, but involves little explanation as to why. Alfred Hitchcock popularized the term in 1932's Number 17 and 1935's The 39 Steps. There's a lot of numbers in there. More recent examples include the briefcase from Pulp Fiction and the Holy Grail from Monty Python's Holy Grail, and the chest from Return of the Obra Dinn. The Formosan chest is a MacGuffin. It spurs Edward Nichols into finding what's inside. The shell is a MacGuffin. Nichols is willing to kill, steal, and ultimately die for it. We don't know whether the shell has magical properties. We don't know how the Formosans came to possess one. We don't know its relationship to the mermaids. All we know is that Nichols really, really wants it. It forces him to act, and that drives the story because character equals story. At least, that's what I've always thought. But, as I've now said, Obra Dinn's characters are not its strength. They're actually one of its few weak links. But forget about what I just said. What do I always say? You won't know if you haven't watched any of these videos, or even if you have, I don't say it that much. But I like to think that that games can tell stories that other mediums can't. I'm sure I've said that at least once. Perhaps I need to tweak that phrase slightly, if it even is a phrase of mine, as well as another one of my earlier statements. Return of the Obra Dinn is not one of the most memorable stories I've played, but it is one of the most memorable narratives. What's the difference? Well, the dictionary definitions are pretty much the same, but there's an important distinction in the video games industry. A writer writes the words in a story, which is an extremely important role because from branching dialogue to side quests to UI menus, games need a lot of words. A narrative designer fits the story and the words within the context of the game. The context always being the game itself, you know, its mechanics. The reason why it's a game and not a film or a comic or that letter you sent to your crush in year 9. I didn't do that. What are you talking about? What? What? Return of the Obra Dinn's key mechanics are exploration and identification. The player must survey the scene and use a keen eye to understand who's who on the Obra Dinn. Lucas Pope has done a wonderful job molding a story to his game mechanics, and it's not the first time he's done it. He takes a mundane task like border control, or insurance claims and stitches it with the dramatic and the mystical, asking us to take a closer look to uncover the truth. Yes, we may be just a 19th century insurance broker on the face of it, but we're also a time-travelling detective. Actual detective work requires deduction, reason, logic, and guesswork, and the Obra Dinn gives us that by the bucket load. It may not seem like that from a story perspective, especially if we are to compare it to other murder mystery types. Like, think LA Noire, where you play as an actual detective in 1940s Los Angeles and is done through, Rockstar's unrivaled level of realism. You visit crime scenes, you talk to witnesses, you jot everything down in your notebook. Proper detective stuff, right?
You fuck young boys, Valdez. Are you a madman?
In Obra Dinn, you wander around a ship with a magic pocket watch, and the art style is one bit. It just has one bit. Do you know how many bits Rockstar have in the offices? Fucking loads. So, like, oh my god. How am I meant to assume doubt when the face is one bit? But from a narrative perspective, Obra Dinn is far better at making you feel like a detective. LA Noire decides who you talk to, what you can say to them, how you can react. You still have some choice, of course, but it turns a broody noir thriller into a fancy multiple choice test. It's still a good game, don't get me wrong, but everything is predetermined. In Obra Dinn, you must reach your own conclusions. There are several opportunities to deduce the identities of crew members. As such, the way you uncover its story will be different to mine. We will both reach the credits, but we will have walked different paths to get there. That is the crux of player agency, and that is why narrative must always take precedent over story. Because you can actually confine a story and get away with it, because what happens is people like me will make videos about it, speculating what it all means. The gaps in Obra Dinn's plot are in keeping with the rules of the game. The inspector may only return to the precise moment of death, because that is what the watch does. It would have been pretty contrived if Nichols, while bleeding out on the floor of a rowing boat, uttered his last words. "Wait, no, don't shoot! Oh, no, I'll never be able to sell the Formosan treasure like I originally intended."
God, no, I was so close as well. But I guess that's what I get for killing Nunzio Pasqua and framing the murder on Hoxing Lao with the help of Li Hong.
But if you confine the narrative, you get the dreaded ludonarrative dissonance, where the events of the story are not paralleled to the gameplay. Games need gameplay over everything else. I know that sounds pretty incredibly obvious, but there are hundreds of games out there that are amazing, and they have no story, no dialogue, no words. There are 0 games out there which have 0 gameplay. If you find one, you let me know, but I would argue whether it's a game at all. So while I sometimes wish that Obra Dinn gave a little bit more to its key characters, like we knew a little bit more about the relationship between Robert and William, and we knew a little bit more about the surgeon's involvement, and we knew a little bit more about Nichols' plans, the game narrative is still completely unique and an absolute triumph. Especially when we consider that it was all made by one guy. You know? Like, it's a lot to ask for some twisting plot, detailed lore, and wealth of characters that are all woven, they have interconnected relationships, when the guy had to code a game. You know? He's got that to worry about, and then fit a narrative to it. A story to it that gels with the mechanics. I mean, could you make this? Could you make that? Really? Like, what would your game look like if you made it all by yourself? Not that. I couldn't even make this. I couldn't even make this. I couldn't make that. I couldn't make that. Look at it. I couldn't make that. So, I'm not going to sit here and nitpick at plot holes when I couldn't even make that. I can do it. So what have we learned? Potentially not a lot. So let me end with this. The story of what happened to the Obra Dinn is a standard seafaring tale of ship sails and terrible beasts. Return of the Obra Dinn story asks you to uncover that truth, drifting through time and detailing the many marks of death. Return of the Obra Dinn's narrative of picking names from a lineup, of remembering faces, remembering voices, and relying on some good old-fashioned guesswork, is one of the most memorable experiences I've had. Congratulations, you've made it to the end of the video. Thanks for Muffin. Boom, gotcha!